In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to download a file from the internet and then show the progress while it's downloading. So this is the simple app we're going to build today, where we have this download button. Now this spins eternally. However, you could also just not let it spin at all. And we have a status text here. And now we are going to press on it and it's going to start downloading a 100 megabytes file. And then you're going to see that the progress indicator here starts progressing little by little. And it's also going to show us here the progress in percentage. So if you press on here, as you can see here, our progress increases and increases, and our progress indicator here slowly increases. Let's get started. So for this app, I simply built a very simple Flutter app, which has a scaffold, and the scaffold has an app bar and then a body, and this body has a column. This column is centered, and within this column we have an elevated button, a circular progress indicator. Of course, this can also be a linear progress indicator, for example a loading bar. For this I made another tutorial. Feel free to check that out because it's the same progress, since we show the progress here with the parameter value, and this value is a value between 0 and 1, so it's a double. And for simplicity purposes, I wrote down what this value does for the circular progress indicator. So if the value is between 0 to 1, then it shows the progress as we've seen before. When it starts downloading, it starts increasing in size. And so if the value is 0, then it won't show anything. And if the value is 1, then it's gonna be a full circle. If this progress is set to null, then it's gonna just spin eternally, as you can see here. If the value goes above 1, it just means it's a full circle. And as mentioned, if the value is 0, then it's going to show nothing. And below this, we simply have a text where we show our status of the download progress. For the app to work, I used two Flutter packages. First, the Flutter package HTTP. We used this package to download a file from the internet. Previously, I've done another tutorial on how to use this package in general. Feel free to check that out. I'll link it in the description box. And also we're going to use the Flutter package path provider. This simply enables us to save a file we download from the internet locally on the device. I also did another tutorial on this, which I'm also going to link in the description box. I'm also going to mention that instead of HTTP, you could also use the Flutter package DIO, which is a more advanced HTTP client for Dart. I'm not going to use this Flutter package within this tutorial, since I want to keep this as simple as possible, and HTTP is in most cases everything you need. But I'm going to mention how to use the DIO Flutter package at the appropriate step within our code. So make sure in your pubspec.yaml file to include the HTTP and the path provider package, and then run pubget. Then make sure to import .io, since we need that for files. Then also the HTTP and the path provider Flutter package. So as mentioned, I defined globally a variable called progress, which is simply our download progress. Then I have another string here called status. So at the beginning, it just says not downloaded, and when it starts downloading, it's going to show us the progress in percentage. And also another variable I defined globally here is the URL to the file we're downloading. In this case, it's a file of size 100 megabytes. You can change this to whatever you want, of course. So now when we press on our download button here, I created a custom function called download button pressed. This is asynchronous, since we're going to do the downloading asynchronously. At the beginning, I set the state in case this is not spinning yet for some reason. And we first need to connect to the server for our HTTP request. So we first show this, then we make the request with get to our URL, which we've previously defined. And then here, this is the most important part. Usually you would use the get function from the HTTP package, but we want to have the progress of the download we are doing. That's why we use client.send, and then we put in our request we defined up here. And this basically gives us back a streamed response. From this response, we usually get a header with which we can determine how big the file size is going to be of the file we're going to download. Sometimes, however, this header is not passed through. Then in that case, you would have two options. Either you can set the X decompressed content length header, and then you could get the content length with this line of code, or you could get the cumulative number of bytes that are being downloaded. However, with the URL I'm using, this works fine, so we don't have to worry about this. But in case it doesn't work, you have to either go for this option here or for this option here. Once we know how big the file is, we can update our UI and set our progress basically to 0. I just set it to such a small number, not exactly 0, so that in the beginning you still would see a little bit of progress, but of course you can set this to 0. This doesn't matter at all. Also, I'm setting the status to download started. Then I'm going to define a list of int where we're going to save in the downloaded bytes. Then here I'm going to get a file into which we're going to save the bytes later on. For this I created a custom function. Here you just put in the file name. Of course, make sure that this is the correct extension. And I define this function down here, and it uses in this case our path provider package. And you could either save this file then within the temporary directory or the application documents directory. Again, if you don't know what these mean, feel free to check out the tutorial I did on the path provider Flutter package. Now we're all set. Now we can listen to the stream of the bytes we're downloading. So of course the bytes we're getting, we're going to add them to our bytes list up here. And then here we can determine how many bytes we've downloaded and then divide the downloaded bytes by the total amount of bytes. So it's a value between 0 and 1, which we're going to use, of course, for our circular progress indicator. Now, in case our content length is actually null, since I've mentioned that this might return null, I'm just going to set the default value to 1. So this, of course, would then break the code here. So in this case, the value is going to exceed 1, so it's going to show the full progress indicator. Otherwise, if everything is going correctly, then we can use this progress to update our status text. And here first, since our progress is nullable, first I'm gonna check whether it's null. So if this is null, I'm just gonna use 0 and then multiply it by 100 to get our percentage. And then here I use this function toString as fixed with 2, because this is gonna round our number to 2 numbers behind the radix point. So for example, if this progress would be like some random long number like that, it would just cut out all these numbers and just have these 2 numbers here behind the radix point. That's all this toString as fixed 2 function does. You could also of course leave this out, and you could of course also leave this times 100 out. So in that case, of course, it's not in percentage. And I'm also printing it to our console. This is what happens while the file is downloading. Once the file download is done, then we can set our progress to 1 so that our progress indicator is now completely full. We can update our status, and then we can write the downloaded bytes to our file, and then our file now contains the downloaded file. If there are any errors, of course, handle them as you like. You could, for example, just show a dialog to the user that there was an error with the download. And lastly, I'm gonna just briefly mention how to do this instead with the DIO Flutter package. For this, you first create an instance of the package, and then you use DIO for a variable defined here, and then .download. Then you use the URL of the file that should be downloaded, then the path and the file name to where this should be downloaded. And then you can make use of this function here called onReceivedProgress, and here you have access to the parameter received and total. So this is the total file size, and this is the received file size. And in this case, for example, you could just set the state, and then in this case, of course, have your progress again. So it's again received divided by the total amount of the file size. I hope you liked this tutorial. Please leave a like and subscribe. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.